Good morning to you, Sebastian.
Hello, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed. I suppose I should also state that you're also in a bid to try and become a Tory candidate at the next election. So we must stress, coming from certainly one particular viewpoint. Let's talk first of all about the migrants issue. They're dealing with both illegal migration and legal migration. It would appear that the government is utterly incapable of dealing with either of these major issues. And we know these are massive issues when it comes to the doorstep, massive issues even within the Tory membership. A poll this week showed that James Cleverly, as Foreign Secretary, he was riding high, way above any other member of the Cabinet in terms of popularity among Conservative Party members. Now he's even below, I think, Rishi Sunak. As soon as he became Home Secretary. Great way to completely do over any possible rival. But why is the Conservative Party so incompetent and incapable of dealing with this issue?
Well, Julia, these are obviously complicated issues that, if there was a simple lever the government could pull to reduce migration, they would have done it by now, because we know what was in the 2019 manifesto. And the fact is, every time the British public have been asked about migration in 2010, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2019, they've made it clear that they want migration to come down. And as we've heard from the Home Secretary, there are some extraordinary circumstances with regards to Ukraine and Hong Kong visas that have put numbers particularly high. But I think it's good to see some action taken on this, and some tough action. The stuff that James Cleverly announced is a good start. I think it's tougher than some were expecting. But you are right that for all Conservatives, control of borders and getting migration down is foundational to any kind of recovery within the opinion polls, because I think the Conservative voting base is very clear that they want lower migration. They want to see tougher border controls for legal and illegal migration. In the research that we've done with Onward, and in a past life, I wrote a book about the Red Wall and all those places that voted Conservative for the first time. All those people made it very clear that one of the reasons they wanted to leave the EU was to have more and tougher border controls. And part of the point of Brexit was to say to UK politicians, you've not got anywhere to hide on this. There's no excuses. You can't just blame Brussels anymore. So it's good to see this action. But ultimately, we heard from James Cleverly, this will bring numbers down, but it is going to have to come down much further. And Robert Jenrick, the immigration minister, said this morning there might be need for more and tougher action. We'll see what happens when these changes get kicked in. But I very much do agree with you that they need to push hard and fast on this, because it's an issue of trust. It's not just what we want to see in terms of the policy. The politicians have delivered consistently over 13 years to say, we will get this down. Now they've actually got to do it.
Yeah, but you say that they're talking tough and it's a tough policy, but it's almost a tough policy on the government's tough policy, supposedly. As you say, they're basically saying, oh, this is terrible. Who did this? Oh, it was us. Oh, OK. Now, I agree with you on the Brexit issue. And I say it's a brilliant book about, what was the thinking in the Red Wall seats, about what were people actually thinking. And again, it wasn't everyone being xenophobic and bigoted. They've all had legitimate economic and cultural concerns about mass immigration, because they're living with the consequences of it, and particularly in a lot of those Red Wall seats. But there is just this absurd situation where for years we had the government saying, no, we can't do anything about numbers coming from the EU. What can we do? We've got open border policy. So Britain said, right, we'll take back control. We close that route, and the government gets to decide. So the government has been able to decide the last couple of years who comes in the country, and even anyone coming from abroad before we left the EU, they've been just literally, delivering just like, there you go, here's a visa, bring your family, here's a visa, come on a student visa, stay, that's fine. They've been welcoming people in. Why have they been doing that? When the British public have told them, and it's not just Tory voters who say this, they've said, we don't think we've got enough room for these people. They're not an economic benefit to us. They're undercutting our wages. We think they are damaging our cultural sort of national fabric with some of the values. They're living separate, parallel societies and communities rather than integrating well. We don't want this. We voted against it, as you say, again and again and again. Why have they still been doing this? Is it all about following the money?
Well, I think the fact is that in 2016, the Brexit vote was about people wanting a fundamental change in the economic model of this country. And I think throughout the 3 turbulent years that Brexit was seen through, and then obviously we hit the pandemic quite soon after that made all sense of normal governing very difficult. But I think in some ways, getting these numbers down and moving to a different economic model is not easy. You can't just flick a switch. And I think in some instances, we've kind of just fallen into doing things exactly as they were before we left the EU. And I think that is not sustainable. And the new migration system that was introduced, the so-called points-based system, was to, again, allow the flexibility to fill gaps. But I think what we've done is kind of reversed the type and just gone for the easy answer of adding occupations to the skill shortage list.
Just keep on bringing people in. Well, look, let's have a little watch and listen of what James Cleverly had to say to the MPs in the House of Commons yesterday.
In total, this package, plus our reduction in student dependence, will mean around 300,000 fewer people will come in future years than have come to the UK last year.
I mean, he didn't even sound convinced by it, did he, Sebastian? Think about this, and Tom Slater is with me in the studio from Spiked Online, and we'll come back to him in a few moments, but he was raising the point about actually a lot of these limits on the visas is actually going to really damage a lot of families. Basically, if you're a high earner, yeah, no problem, bring your family over. If you're a low earner but doing really vital work, there's an awful lot of jobs in this country that pay below minimum wage, or below median wage, sorry, who actually are absolutely vital. We discovered those people during lockdown. They actually keep the country running, even when everyone else is sitting there on their laptops drinking lattes. Wonder where those lattes came from. You know, but those people won't basically be allowed to bring their families, their wives, their husbands, their kids. Those people aren't going to come to this country then. And apparently we don't have people in this country to replace those people because people can't be bothered to get off their backsides to do the job themselves.
Well, I think to the point on social care workers, we do need to pay social care workers more. I think that's just a simple fact. And as has been said from some government ministers, we also have about 5 million economically inactive people in this country. And in the recent autumn statement, there was quite a lot of measures to try and deal with that. But I think ultimately, you know, it is not sustainable, as you said, Julia, on the economic or social fabric of this country to have migration running over 700,000 people a year. And I mean, I said that will come down because of the unique circumstance the last 12 months with Ukraine and Hong Kong. But this comes back to my point about the economic model that sort of allows people to come in. It's just doing exactly what we did before we left the EU. That's not what people voted for. They voted for fundamental change. And that means making sure we've got more social care workers that are in our domestic labour market and paying them more so they do that. I mean, as you said, if you just cut off the labour supply and don't make any other changes to the domestic labour market, that would have some very bad impacts, you know, on potential services. So we've got to make sure the government is doing the work to getting people who are economically inactive into those sectors to pay them properly. And then that's what people voted for in 2016. And then really what people voted for in 2019, the Conservative manifesto as well.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, let's talk about, again, talk about, voters and winning votes and talking about growth. And we're constantly told, again, mass migration delivers growth. We've had it for 20 years. We had another 10 million people. Growth is just nowhere. Keir Starmer yesterday gave a big speech on economics, and he talked about what his defining purpose would be. Let's have a watch and listen of what he had to say.
The defining purpose of the next Labour government, the mission that stands above all others, will be raising Britain's productivity growth, a goal that for my Labour Party will become an obsession.
Defining policy is, growth. Liz Truss said that and everyone mocked her. But he has also been saying that actually, they're not going to be turning the spending taps on. Where, from what you've seen, from what he's had to say, where is that growth going to come from?
I mean, growth should be an obsession for every single politician because no one should be happy or satisfied with the current levels of growth we've got in this country. And if we are going to have better public services and a more prosperous economy, then growth obviously has to increase. No one disagrees on that in the slightest. The question is how you get there and what you do to prioritize it. And, some people talk about growth about just slashing taxes and doing it. I don't think that's sustainable either. To get better growth, you've got to do lots of hard yards in terms of improving our productivity, improving our skills, improving our infrastructure, making sure our labour market's in the right places. And From Labour, I don't quite see that thinking to get there. That the only thing we've heard from Labour is they're going to spend £28 billion on their green investment, which is a completely unfunded spending commitment.
Well, no, hold on a minute. They've said they
how
now won't have the money. So it'd be £38 billion a year, but they might not have the money in the first 5 years. So, I mean, if it's investment money, then surely that's going to lead to more growth. So that's the money you should be spending. They can't borrow it. They can't realistically promise to tax us more and get elected. So where's that money coming from?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is the point, right? That it was originally £28 billion a year. Then, as you say, that's going to ramp up through the first Parliament, according to Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor. But the ultimate question is, it is still fundamentally unfunded, because the only two tax rises Labour have talked about, one is removing charitable status on private schools, and the other is clamping down on non-doms. And I think both of them are magic money tree economics, because the private schools thing will fundamentally not result in a huge amount of money to pay for £28 billion. I think Labour only estimate 1 or 2 billion. That's before you get into the fact it will result in some private schools closing and result in extra pressure on the state school. And on the non-doms basis, there's no evidence at all that's actually going to bring in much extra money. So I don't really see where they're going to get the money for this £28 billion.
That's the thing. But at least there's some scrutiny about this now, because as we're heading towards an election, whether it's May or October next year. Sebastian Payne, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much indeed.